Welcome to Forthright with Sulani Madsen. The 2023 legislature is in session, and Governor Inslee and Attorney General Bob Ferguson are taking advantage of the opportunity to push bills popular with their base, not so popular with Republicans. After reading this column from a few weeks ago, I'll give an update on the bills I mentioned and a bit of personal commentary. The headline: Principles, Emotions, and Practicality Collide Over Public Safety Issues. As published Thursday, January 19, 2023 in the Spokesman Review, protecting public safety is common ground. The challenge of securing safety while protecting individual liberty was highlighted by the testimony over 4 bills heard in the House Judiciary Committee on Tuesday in Olympia. Raised the issue of gun control, and common ground is quickly deserted. Appeals were made to emotion, practicality, and principle. HB 1143 would require obtaining a permit before purchasing a firearm. HB 1144 is similar but adds a mandatory training requirement prior to purchase. HB 1240 is an assault weapons ban, and HB 1178 would allow city and county ordinances regulating guns to supersede state law. There was much emotion on display, from a woman who had experienced grief following the suicide of a family member to a woman who had experienced the terror of a home invasion and valued having the means to defend herself. Powerful emotional appeals are a poor basis for state policy, but personal anecdotes do illustrate issues. Clearly, as a society, we need to work on mental health care and social stigmas around asking for help. However, adding delays and cost to gun purchases wouldn't necessarily change the tragedy of a suicide. If someone does not already own a gun, substitute means are ubiquitous. HB 1143 and HB 1144 require a waiver of medical records privacy, paying fees, and in the case of HB 1144, completing approved training before being granted a permit to purchase. Several testifiers pointed out that exercising no other basic right is contingent on proving mental health, ability to pay, or education. Walla Walla County Sheriff Mark Kreider said there was no way his office had the resources to fingerprint every person in his county who wanted a permit to legally purchase a gun. Imagine applying the same requirements in order to vote. It would clearly be voter suppression. Laws rather obviously apply only to people inclined to follow them. Robin Ball, retired owner of a Spokane gun shop and firing range, said the bills do not address the real problems behind misuse of firearms. She pointed to the frequency with which gun violations are pled to lower charges or mostly dropped in our state courts, a lawyerly strategy which also reduces the usefulness of background checks. This bill will have no impact on gun violence, Ball said. HB 1240 is another run at an assault weapons ban, a squishy term at best in spite of the bill's attempt at a definition. Both pro and con testifiers referred to the 1994 Clinton-era ban, asserting either that it worked well or had little to no impact. The Annenberg Public Policy Center's factcheck.org says both sides cherry-pick the data and describe the results of the ban as mixed. While, quote, crimes involving assault weapons declined, it was offset through at least the late 1990s by steady or rising use of other guns. Suppress one weapon, and it's no surprise that another takes its place. Spokane City Council President Brian Beggs weighed in supporting HB 1178, saying, quote, decisions are best made closest to the people they are impacting, end quote. He will surely be reminded of that statement anytime state regulations are debated in Spokane. As Spokane County Sheriff John Knowles pointed out, while he generally agrees with the principle of local decisions are best, allowing different jurisdictions to have different standards is simply unworkable for state concealed pistol license holders. He pointed to his own commute, which crosses 4 jurisdictions from home to work, not unlike many workers in the area. Complying with a patchwork of rules for storage and transport is, quote, an unreasonable expectation, Knowles said. Reject and do not create criminals out of our good citizens, end quote. Beggs testified that HB 1178 would provide more flexibility for local options to protect public safety, quote, as long as we maintain those minimum constitutional rights, end quote. In a follow-up email asking what those local options might be, Beggs said, quote, in the past, I have pondered civil financial remedies for gunshot victims from those sharing in responsibility of the shooting in addition to the shooter, who usually doesn't seem to have any assets. There could be clearer liability for gun owners who don't secure their guns adequately, end quote. His point of view on HB 1178 is shaped by his own experience, having armed protesters on his front lawn, saying in his email he was also now more open to considering, quote, vulnerable locations where guns shouldn't be allowed, either due to the risk of casualties or the high potential for intimidation, end quote. I empathize with that feeling of vulnerability, although the protesters haven't been on my lawn yet. Credible threats have meant exercising my own rights under Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington State Constitution. The right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired. And that means no impairment with a system of fees, tests, special definitions, and a patchwork of rules. And now for the update. HB 1144 is in committee with no action taken, but its requirements for training in order to get a permit to purchase a firearm have been blended into HB 1143, which is still moving through the system. HB 1143 has been replaced with substitute HB 1143 and has been voted out of committee with a do pass recommendation by the Democrat majority. For a party supposedly interested in equity, it makes exercising this constitutionally guaranteed right difficult to impossible for anyone who lacks the time or the money to take an expensive training course in order to get a permit to purchase a gun. It is an unnecessary hoops. There is no other constitutional right that has requirements to qualify and pay for a permit to exercise it. If the state would like to enact such requirements equitably, make it part of the secondary school curriculum and available at no charge to citizens. Do the same kinds of outreach and education efforts as we put into voting. HB 1240 with the assault weapons ban has a substitute version with a few additional requirements, but is essentially unchanged. It has also been voted out of committee with a do pass recommendation by the majority Democrats. The minority report on the bill is pretty clear. Besides pointing at the invented definition to call certain kinds of rifles assault weapons, the minority report out of committee by the Republicans points out a federal Department of Justice report that 88.8% of gun violence is perpetrated by people illegally in possession of firearms, and 98% of gun deaths are caused by handguns. HB 1240 doesn't really address an actual problem, nor does it really offer a solution that has any evidence that it will work. And I'm not even sure what it's trying to do. HB 1178 and its potential for a patchwork of laws changing in every jurisdiction looks to be on track to die in committee. There's been no action taken. So, 2 bills down, 2 moving. You can track the status of any bill online and send your comments to legislators. I'll put the link in the Substack post. So a little personal background. There was a time when the training requirements of HB 1143 would have sounded perfectly reasonable to me. Just like driving a car. Why wouldn't we require training and a license to own something powerful and dangerous? That was before I really gave the underlying principle much thought. When I first ran for office in 2004, firearms weren't on my issue list. My husband had a few long guns and used to hunt before life on the ranch got so busy, but that was his interest, not mine. I was taught the basic safety rules for firearms as a child, even though my parents didn't own any. Treat all guns as if they are loaded. Don't point a gun at anyone or at anything you aren't willing to destroy. Don't touch a gun if you don't know what you're doing. And you, speaking to me, the child, you don't know what you're doing. Fair enough. That was about the extent of my exposure to firearms. So I was campaigning. It had been a long, hot day. Been to several events, probably been to a couple of parades. It's the end of the day, and I come to a local, in the neighborhood gathering of folks for a small fundraiser. And old guy walks up to me, known him for a long time. Harry asks, "So what do you think of the Second Amendment?" My mind went totally blank, and I couldn't remember which one the Second Amendment was. Trying to buy time for my brain to click in, I said, I'm in favor of the entire Bill of Rights. And then I realized he's wearing an NRA hat, Second Amendment. Okay, I got it. We're talking about, and he has a pistol range and a space for the local FFA team to practice skeet shooting out behind his house. I don't know where my head was that day. So at any rate, I realized clearly this was an issue that I needed to study, and so I did. And I've read quite a lot of points of view on firearms and the Second Amendment, and which is actually a little bit more restrictive, if anything, than the Washington State Constitution, which Article 1, Section 24 is pretty plain, no impairment. So I came to the conservative, and I have to admit, I come to the conservative side of the political spectrum with a very individualist and libertarian bent. And I found the arguments from the Cato Institute, which is primarily a libertarian-leaning organization, the most compelling. Based on a simple reading of the text, the Bill of Rights itself is focused on rights of individuals. The Second Amendment refers to the right of the people. It applies to individuals just like all the other rights in the Bill of Rights: speech, religion, assembly, redress of grievances, protection against search and seizure. It's not about a community right. Based on history and the Federalist Papers arguments on why the Second Amendment is worded the way it says, the well-regulated militia is that key word there. The intent was for individuals to be armed so as not to ever be at the mercy of a standing army maintained by the government. The reference to a militia was a compromise to both allow the government to maintain a standing army and as well as provide some limited state power over a local militia. To quote from a Cato Institute publication on the issue, "A disarmed society, because its citizens are defenseless, tends to adopt police-state tactics and extinguish civil liberties. Hence, an individual right to bear arms is prophylactic. It reduces the demand for a police state while securing freedom." So what I also discovered from that study is that I'm a constitutional originalist, as opposed to seeing the Constitution as a living document to be reinterpreted by judges to suit modern sensibilities and culture. Those are both valid points of view about how the court should operate, the originalist versus the living document. They are in conflict now, just as they have been for as long as the Supreme Court has existed. There is a process for modifying the Constitution, and it isn't for judges to read into it rights that aren't there, or to invent reasons for doing whatever they or everyone would like to do, or allowed or forbidden when they're not addressed by the original Constitution. And that's what the legislative process is for. The test for whether you're following the basic principles or a current preference is to look at other rights. If you would not apply the hoops and permits to any other right, like voting or being allowed to attend church services, they cannot be applied to guns. We do have serious mental health problems. I will be digging into that a whole lot more over this next year. We are not doing a good job of taking care of citizens' mental health, and we can do so much more. We need more access to gun safety education, along with a well-educated citizenry. A citizenry that can also figure out how to fill out and return a ballot thoughtfully. So we need a combination of education and a better attention to mental health to really address gun violence issues. But more and more regulations on those who are already following or attempting to follow the rules is not going to help solve the problem of the 88.8% who aren't supposed to even have a firearm in the first place. There's always a weapon. Suppress one, another will replace it. Thanks for joining me on this edition of Forthright, and I look forward to providing something next week as well, in follow-up to the column that was published today on earthquake preparedness and the earthquake in Turkey. And I hope that my dog sneezing over there didn't make it onto the audio, but we'll see. See you later.